There we go. Welcome to another episode of the Keeg Talks. It's that show brought to you by the Keeg, where we talk about a different topic every other week. Lately, it's been roughly like every week. I feel like we've had a lot to talk about. For those of you who don't know, it is AAPI Heritage Month. What month is it? It's May. Yes, it's May. I knew the AAPI Heritage part, but what month is it? Yeah, it's still May. It's May 21st, 2022. And today we are talking about AAPI representation in media. I'm your host, Dimitri Pereira, and it's not just going to be 2 hours of me talking because that would get boring. You guys get enough of that. I have brought on three awesome guests that I will introduce individually. First, to my right, we have Cindy, aka It's Cindy Che.
Yes.
Yeah. I know we were joking earlier, and I was like, I shouldn't make the same mistake. It's Cindy.
No,
Che.
it's all good. It's all good. So
you rebranded recently.
yeah, I think I rebranded on Tuesday. So this is very recent. So before, for everybody that doesn't know, before I was Cindy Che, I was Cindy Moon with 7 O's. And it's inspired by my favorite Spider-Man superheroine, Cindy Moon. So I decided to switch to not be exactly like her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you are a big Cindy Moon fan.
I'm still a big Cindy Moon fan. That is never gonna change.
Yeah.
So yeah. So like departing from the username, I was just like, well, what about Cindy? And I'm just like, she's still there. It's just gonna be. And I said this in my post where I talked about why I changed my name. It's she's still there. I'm just sharing the spotlight with her now.
Yeah. And this is more, it's more about you and like what you like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was doing a lot more than Cindy Moon cosplay. So
yeah. Also, as like a show producer, was it hell for me to remember that you have 7 O's in Moon? Yeah. Yeah.
But you still enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it because I could say it's Cindy Moon. But it is rebranding season. For anyone who didn't know, it's rebranding season. Everybody's rebranding right now. So
I saw so many other people were rebranding, and I was just like, oh, okay, guess it's time. So.
Yeah. It's catching on. But thank you, Cindy, for coming on this episode. I look forward to hearing everything you got to say.
Thank you.
We also have the White Wolf of Themyscira himself, JT. JT, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I feel like we've recently become mutuals on TikTok. And like,
we have.
And then I'm like, what'd you do recently that you tagged me in? I'm trying to remember. Either you saw one of mine and you did it. I forget. But that's TikTok for you.
Yeah, I can't remember, but I definitely know I tagged you on something.
I feel like we've been revolving around the same things for a while now.
Yeah,
and like
we have very similar content. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. One could say that, I mean, some people say that I just look at your content and I just copy it. But
one could say the same thing about me.
I'm glad to have you on the show, though.
Thank you for having me.
It's always nice to have fresh blood. Is that what the phrase is? New blood?
New blood, fresh blood,
fresh meat.
Fresh meat.
It's oddly violent. Whatever these sayings are. Either way, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me again.
And then, sorry, what?
I was gonna say, I feel like after the movie Fresh, it's just really strange to be using the term fresh meat. If you see,
I have not seen it, but I heard about it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet because it might ruin my image of Sebastian, and I'm such a huge Sebastian stan.
Yeah.
I read the Wikipedia entry for it because I do that for certain horror movies that I'm like, I'm not going to watch it, but I just want to know what it's about. Because somebody did a meme of like, how's this girl dancing without a butt? And I'm like, I don't get it, but okay, let me look it up. And then it's true.
That's got to be a fun thing on your Google search history now.
Yeah. Why women dance when women have no butt? That's what I do.
Women dance, no butt? Question.
Very niche. Very niche content. Yeah.
Yeah. But for anyone who's listening to the podcast, they can't see who we are. And they're like, oh, who are all these voices? Whatever. If you're listening to the podcast, you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Maybe some other apps. I'm not quite sure. But if you're watching live stream, you can see exactly who it is. You're watching live stream on volume.com/The Keeg Show, which whereas Volume is our #1 streaming platform. We also got twitch.tv/The Keeg Show and youtube.com/The Keeg. But if you heard a disembodied voice because you're listening to the podcast, we got Shiv over here, Chivalry Inc., Shiv.Ulri. Shiv, how's it going?
It's going great, man. I'm excited to be here. This is like one of my favorite topics. So
I
it's gonna be a good time.
I knew, I was like, I want Shiv on this episode after the whole Archie's debacle.
Yikes. Yeah.
like-
Definitely an interesting one to get into for sure.
Because I was in those comments. I was like, I just because like I feel like we all are very similar. Like we're creating content, and then it's like it takes a lot for us to like jump into the comments of somebody else and like put in work on somebody else's stuff. But your Archie's video, which I'm sure we'll go over. Yeah, I felt I had to be there.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you chiming in on it. I mean, there's not a lot of other South Asian creators, I feel like, that review movies and TV. So I think it was a really great perspective to bring into it. So I appreciate it.
This episode specifically of the Keeg Talks, we are talking about Asian, so AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander. But the abbreviation's really clunky. Anyway, the point being is, we're talking about like Asian heritage, Pacific Island heritage, representation in media, and that. How do you guys feel about AAPI? Does that sum everything up? Is this just another abbreviation on the way to something else?
It's a tricky subject, AAPI, because I recently just did a TikTok where I was saying who like my top 5 favorite, AAPI comic book characters, Marvel and DC. And I wasn't thinking, I was just saying my top 5, but I neglected some PI characters and I got reamed for that. They're like, well, if you're going to do AAPI, you're not representing PI. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right, I didn't. And, I think it was my Marvel one. And it was like, I know of Loa and I know of Mondo, but they're not really in my forefront. So I just named my 5. But so I found out like PI Pacific Islanders technically want to separate from the AAPI month situation. They want their own month. So that becomes like such a tricky subject.
Right.
So I don't know how I feel about that.
Right. This abbreviation is not something that I knew of. Before a certain point. I feel like it's popped up recently. Is it nice that at least we're putting a word onto it? Yeah, but like maybe it's just a stepping stone to something better. I don't know. Cindy, did you have a thought on that?
No, I agree with you. I didn't have an abbreviation or a phrase for this growing up, and I think the first time I ever heard of AAPI or APITA. That's what I.
APITA?
That's APITA. It's Asian Pacific Islander. I don't remember what the D stands for.
Oh, it's a D. I thought it was a T.
Yes.
it's APITA. That's what I've heard. That's
like
what I.
Bread. I've never
no, not like that. But yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what the abbreviation is, but that's like another. That's another abbreviation.
Okay.
That's the one that's at my college, the one I went to. That's the
Asian Pacific Islander Desi American.
Yes, that's it.
That's what I'd looked up. Yeah.
That is it. Yes. Thank you for looking that up. But that's what I first heard. And the first time I ever heard it was in college when I was a sophomore. So this is a very new thing for me, or a very new thing in general. And I do think it's a step in the right direction because representation really does matter. And yeah, I see it as a positive right now. And talking about this type of stuff is also important as well. So that's why I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I don't think there's just like one word that will encompass everyone. This is my first time seeing AAPI. I was like, oh that also could be some girl's name. Like it sounds like a person, you know?
Yeah, my college has cultural centers, and the one for Asian Pacific Islander, it's AAPI. That's why. That's why I know that one.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. I wish I had that growing up. Damn.
That's new. Yeah, that's new.
I pre-show, I think we figured out that Shiv and I are from the same county.
Yeah, wild. Not many brown people here, so that's very interesting to me. Mine is Irvine.
Are you okay? You're in Irvine.
I'm in Orange, the city of Orange.
Okay, so yeah. I'm in Fullerton, but I had a very dare I say unique high school experience because I went to Troy High School.
Okay,
are you familiar?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
it's like, are we Asian in Orange County? Yes, we know Troy High School. So I went to Troy High School, which was pretty much half white, half Asian, and that part is the mixed part. That's the AAPI part.
Yeah,
you know. And so like what was I forget where I was going with that. So I was one of many Asians, South Asians even, but only like one of 4 Sri Lankans, and 2 of them were my cousins. So 3 of us are related, and then 1 of us was not. So but as far as like Asian or South Asians were concerned, there was a bunch of us in high school at least. But that was interesting. Did you guys grow up in like a diverse area? Like, what was it like growing up in like wherever you guys grew up?
I grew up in a Chinese dominant neighborhood. So a lot of my neighbors, they all were hanging out. And I actually always wondered why my mom was never hanging out with them. My mom's Cambodian, so it's not the same culture. So yeah.
I grew up in, sorry, JC.
No, go ahead.
I grew up in a city called Arcadia, which is like 92% Asian. And within that, the amount of South Asians or mostly brown people, there's probably like not even 5. So I would say that I was raised around a lot of specifically Chinese culture, but just like a whole mixture of Japanese, Taiwanese, Korean, like you name it. It's crazy. So I did feel like a minority in some way, but then also when you're on a Scantron and you're like trying to fill in who you are, you have to identify as Asian. Yeah. So that term Asian American was like such a strange thing as a kid because like, yeah, I definitely was Asian, but the Asians didn't consider me part of their Asian. So it definitely didn't look like them. So it was just a strange place to fit in.
That's bringing up so many things in my own head. Quick question about Arcadia. And this actually ties in with the subject. Have you ever seen Joan of Arcadia?
I haven't.
I haven't either.
Okay.
But I want to know how many Asians were in the show.
Was it based off of the city though, or is it based off of some other concept?
It's Joan of Arc in Arcadia, I think, but like she's getting like visions or something. It's Amber Tamblyn, who's not Asian, which is fine. But what I'm trying to say is, was it representing Arcadia properly?
Probably not.
Probably
Arcadia now has become a lot more diverse, but back when I was growing up, it definitely wasn't. But there is a huge separation. It's like the upper side of Arcadia and the lower side, and the lower side is very Asian, and the upper side is like old money wealth that existed from like the 50s. So it's like all white people. So it could be. Maybe
I'm looking at the cast right now, and
not a single Asian.
It's not. Yeah.
Unsurprising. Yeah.
I mean, this ties in with kind of what we were talking about, like, but okay, cool. We'll get to that. We'll probably circle right back to that. JT, were you gonna say?
I grew up in New York, so it's literally a melting pot of multicultures. But when I was growing up, I'm probably the oldest one here. I'm almost 50, so I grew up in the 70s. Okay. And there was a lack of representation for me. I mean, I had Chinese kids in school, I had Koreans, I had Japanese, but I was literally the only Filipino, and I didn't relate to the Asian community. I didn't relate to the white community. I just had no idea what I was. So every time we had the Scantron, I would always check off Pacific Islander because I thought I was Pacific Islander. But as I got older and I did my research, I realized I'm South Asian. I'm Asian. But yeah, I mean, like, it wasn't so much I felt different because I did have some Asian representation in school, but I always felt slightly different because I didn't see anybody that was Filipino like myself.
Yeah. Sorry, I got thrown off by Paula la 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 99 says almost 50. I thought you were like 25. OMG. So sorry. So yeah,
1972.
Are we allowed to say Asians don't raisin? Because that is a phrase.
Clearly a fact here now.
Yes.
By GT,
Yeah.
The other term I've heard was beige don't age.
I like that so much better. I like that. There's something. Okay, so like something that's interesting about like AAPI or APITA or whatever is that like it's with so many different cultures and we're not a monolith at all. We get lumped into this Heritage Month, but the Middle East, does that count? For because that's Central Asia or West Asia. I'm not quite sure. And that's something like there's so many cultures. We're spanning like half the globe here.
When I do my research, they do bring in Middle Eastern, especially like Turkey, because a quarter of Turkey is in Europe. But if you cross the Bosphorus Bridge, you go into Asia.
Yeah.
So if you're Turkish, you're either European if you were born on one side or Asian if you were born on the other.
Right.
Wow.
The thing is like race and these continental lines are like social constructs because they're not easily defined. Like where Turkey is, it's like Greek wasn't considered European, but or like considered white. It was considered European, but it was not considered white. There's like this like long history of like what is what, and I mean, it's kind of a tough topic to tackle, but we're gonna solve all the problems in the next 2 hours. So
lots of pressure. Yeah, totally.
lots of pressure. Something that I forget who brought it up. Something that I just realized is that there's the South Pacific, which is not South Asian. Then there's South Asian, which is the Indian subcontinent and all outlying islands in the Indian Ocean, whether or not it's part of India. Like I speak from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's in the Indian Ocean, but not part of India. But it's part of the Indian subcontinent, but it's not a contiguous part of the continent. It's weird. Everything's weird. And you know what messed it all up? Colonization. That's
100. I mean, I think all of us can agree on that. So.
Oh yeah. Filipino culture is like a melting pot of multiple cultures.
Yeah. The Sri Lanka, everywhere. Yeah. I was doing my research into Sri Lanka because it's not, talked about much. So I had to like do my own independent research and like, oh yeah, just like 600 years of colonization across 3 different European countries.
Yep.
Cool. My last name is Pereira and it's Portuguese. And it's like, nobody knows if is it because we're mixed or is it because we were owned? Both? I don't know.
The amount of Spanish last names in the Filipino community is amazing.
Yeah. It's wild. What were you guys watching when you were younger? And were you watching anything with Asian representation?
Yikes. I grew up watching a lot of Disney Channel, and there are not a lot of brown people on Disney Channel. There are some Asian people. You had Brenda Song, obviously. Huge
trailblazer. We did.
And I feel like what's crazy is to see Disney Channel now and to see how much of a diversity play they're doing is really great. At the same time, you just kind of feel like, okay, but where was it when I was growing up? And how would that have shaped my confidence going to school and then going to college? And so it's something I think about a lot now. The kids that are growing up, like how that affects who they are and the way they identify culturally. But other than just Disney Channel, I watched a ton of Bollywood movies, even though I'm from the south of India. And that is kind of what made me feel seen at the end of the day, because there was a whole industry dedicated to just brown people, right? And it was the equivalent of Hollywood. So I'm lucky that I had at least that to kind of tie into my identity. But at the same time, it's not like I could go to school and be like, oh my God, you watch this Bollywood movie? Like, they're not going to know what I'm talking about, you know? So it felt very lonely at the same time, or that I could only talk to my family about it.
Yeah. Real quick, just as a refresher to, or you know, even new information to anyone out there who's watching, Bollywood is based in North India and does not have really any South Indian people in it, right?
Yes.
In the industry.
Correct. Yeah. They also are like very known for the fact that they promote this idea of Eurocentric beauty standards. So a lot of the females specifically are very lighter skinned Indians. They don't have a lot of melanin in them, which does not reflect any part of the Indian subcontinent, right? So it's very alienating watching it. So even within the sphere that I felt represented in, there's like a certain sense of like, well, I still don't belong, right? Like I have way darker skin than these people, and that's just not me. So
colorism is something that's been talked about more recently, but like really has been talked about for like generations. Just putting the word onto it is you know, has been important in like identifying colorism. I feel like it affects like every country, every colonized country, there's some like something up with colorism and whatnot. I think that's an interesting thing to point out, that it's not even race related. But it's also just color and what that means. I forget what my original question was, if anyone remembers.
It was what we grew up watching, and like if we felt represented. I've been thinking about that question for a while, and I grew up, my favorite Disney princess was Cinderella, and I was obsessed with Disney Channel. I was obsessed with Disney Channel as well, but I don't remember relating to any of those characters in a cultural sense. So I don't think I've ever really felt represented in a character until recently. And the character the character I feel the most represented with in a cultural standpoint, it's not Cindy actually, it's Raya, Raya and the Last Dragon, because she's based on Southeast Asian culture. And not only was that a big deal for me, it was a big deal for my mom, because ever since she found out who Raya was, my mom's kind of like been really proud. Like my mom has this like little smirk when we talk about Raya, and it's funny. And like I started cosplaying Raya, and it's been really nice because it's like my mom has always been like very confused and weirded out about my cosplay hobby, but this was the first character she was like, I'm gonna build this cosplay with you, we're gonna do it right. This is what this part of her outfit's called. It's not supposed to be called kanji in the movie, it's supposed to be babal. And I was just like, okay mom, keep telling me more facts, like go off, like please. So this is so funny. But Raya is the character I feel the most represented with, and she's only been around for a year. So
has it only been a year?
Yep. In March it was the 1 year anniversary of Raya being
wow.
Yep.
Is she utilized as much as she should be?
I think she's starting to be utilized more. They did introduce her to the Disneyland parks. They introduced her during Lunar New Year. I'm not sure if they introduced her to Disney World. And there's a lot of toys out there for her. Like, I don't know why, but a lot of like the kids' toys at Target are perfect for cosplay. They have part of the dragon gem. They have the dragon necklace that Namari gives her, and I use that in my cosplay. I just went to Target and bought it. Yeah. So I'm just kind of like, not only are these kids' toys, but they're good for cosplay. It's really funny.
Multi-purpose.
Yes, exactly. I love it here.
Everything that you guys bring up, it brings up like 5 other questions and like things to go on, but no, we're going to continue with this. JT.
Yes. What I grew up watching. So obviously I love Wonder Woman. So I grew up watching her because I was watching TV in the 70s and 80s, and I had zero representation. Like the representation I got were these racist caricatures. Like, for example, white people playing Asian characters. So I had zero representation. Not until it was like in the 2000s when I would start seeing representation. But growing up, and I think that's what skewed my, psyche, where I was like, well, I want to be white because I had zero representation. Like, what did I watch? Bionic Woman, Bionic Man, Charlie's Angels, Love Boat. It was just like all white people, like barely any representation from any country.
Right. It's even though we're making leaps and bounds now, that's been a relatively like recent change, especially when it comes to AAPI representation in media. But even in a broader sense, just like having people of color in media has been a recent thing, or at least the proliferation of it has been recent. I grew up watching a lot of TV Land because my parents like can't vet a show that's like new for like kids, so they're like, okay, we're gonna watch the things that like we watched, but because of that,
what I watched.
Basically, yes. Reruns.
I might be as old as your parents.
I'm not saying one way. No. My parents are older. I'm not as young as I look, but I like beige don't age. I like that. That's the first time I've heard that. I use brown don't frown. That's my thing. But beige don't age works well. Though I don't know whether I'm beige, but regardless, neither here nor there. Yes, I did grow up on TV Land, and you're right, Charlie's Angels, something that I grew up on. And the standard of beauty is white woman. That's really like, so the standard of beauty is white woman. The standard of like male action hero, of course we have this like toxic masculinity portion of it, but it's really also like white guys kicking ass. Or if you're Asian, martial arts. It's like this like random thing. And so like growing up, even though like Bruce Lee existed, and Bruce Lee does not prove that there was representation, just that there was him. There wasn't South Asian representation at all. So like we got like Aladdin was like a big thing for me growing up. I loved Aladdin. Is it even remotely the same culture as Sri Lanka or South Asia? No, because it was Agrabah, which is a fictional location in a fictional Middle Eastern-esque society. But Aladdin was cool. Aladdin's still cool, but at the same time, like there wasn't any. I think I grew up more with like black shows, the Jeffersons on reruns, Fresh Prince, Family Matters. I was a big Urkel fan. And that, like, I think was, like, a big thing to me growing up. And then we got more representation, as everybody, I'm sure, has stories of caricatures and stereotypes of... there'll always be, like, some kid named Ravi or Baljit in something, and now people call you that. Did you guys have any? Did you guys have any like experience with people watching a show and then relating it back to you, their only person of reference?
For me, no, because there weren't any Filipino representation.
Yeah.
So they couldn't really call me anything.
Did they call you anything tangentially? Did they anything Asian?
No, not really.
Okay.
They didn't know what to make of me.
Right.
They thought I was Hawaiian. Because I'm 6 foot tall, and I was always the tallest kid in class. So they always assumed I was Hawaiian.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I did have experience with like when in elementary school there was I have a vivid memory of a kid calling me Chinese lady, and it would always irritate me because it was the wrong culture. It's like I was just like, you do realize I'm Cambodian and I've told you that I'm Cambodian. You keep calling me Chinese lady. Like, are you not listening? And like, obviously we're kids, so how do we know any better? And I remember at one point said, okay, Cambodian lady. And I was like, thank you, finally. And then he stopped, and I never heard him tease me again. And now I'm kind of thinking about that. I'm just kind of like, wow, I really shot down that bully. But when you were talking about like the stereotypes and things like going in, like when you see representation, but it's like as caricatures and stuff, the one that I vividly remember the most, it's like Asians aren't good at driving. I've seen that play out in comedy shows, and that was like the biggest stereotype for me. Like people will always be like, oh, you're not going to be a good driver because you're Asian. And I'm realizing, I was just like, I didn't even realize that was like as impactful as it was, because it's just kind of like, oh wow, like this was really stigmatized, like about our driving skills, when our driving skills ultimately don't have anything to do with the culture we were raised in, or like what we were born as. It's just, that was just a stereotype, and it was a funny gag for TV. So
I just remember, did London Tipton have to learn how to drive?
Yeah, and London Tipton was an awful driver.
Because she didn't know.
Yeah. And it's funny because as we're talking, I'm thinking more and more about like representation then versus representation now. And now that I'm thinking about the driving one, in Shang-Chi, Katie Chen is a fantastic driver. Oh, so I'm just kind of like, oh my God, we've already started beating this. Like, woo, yes.
Yeah. Shiv?
Yeah, the way that stereotypes work in my mind is like a twofold impact, where like the first step is like that visual representation. People like latch on to the characters, and then they constantly cross-identify you that way. So like mine was always Kelly Kapoor from The Office, even though I looked nothing like Mindy Kaling.
Right.
But because I was like baseline funny, and I was very outgoing and extroverted, and because The Office was one of my favorite shows, I constantly got identified as her, when we have like nothing in common, you know, like she's obviously a huge character even of herself, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, you have the visual representation of like Apu from The Simpsons, who I absolutely hated growing up, because obviously there's a whole accent bullying that happens because of that. And randomly, the guy from How I Met Your Mother that was a taxi driver, which was like the only identifiable brown person in such a popular comedy series. Yeah. If you're a Seinfeld fan, there's a guy that owned the name is failing me right now, but the one that owned the restaurant across the street, he was Pakistani. So there's the stereotype visually, right, that you get compared to. And then there's the impact that it has like in bullying and how people talk to you and perceive you, which I think is like the worst part, right? Because now they're attaching all the things that they see on screen. They somehow think that that is you, right? And that rightfully they can bully you for those things. And specifically as a brown woman, I think it's a lot of the time that, that we're submissive, or that we are only meant to do certain things in life and never really surpass that. Also just an overall Asian stereotype for women. And then on top of that, that we are like hairy and smelly and sweaty, which is like perpetuated a lot in comedy shows, like Cindy was mentioning, that only now recently, I feel like because of PC culture has kind of like really subsided. Right. But to me, it's always worked in those two ways, right? Where you have something like visually that people make fun of you for, and then something that they've like now, because it's almost like they learned what this specific type of group represents. They're like, we're just going to bully you because of those reasons. So yeah.
I feel like the stereotypes and like we have all these groups within our like Asian umbrella that everyone's kind of dealing with their own stereotypes. Then there's some crossover, but then there's also like, it's all intersectional, as well as the treatment of men versus women. That's like a whole other thing. That's like there's different stereotypes for one or the other. Asian women versus Asian men, right? Like, what are, the different stereotypes there? I forget where I was going with that, but
I think it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, I was just thinking, I think the reason why I didn't get picked on for being Asian is because they didn't know what to choose, whether they're going to pick on me for being AAPI or LGBTQ. So they had a gamut of the alphabet they wanted to pick on. They chose the LGBTQ part.
They were like, oh no, an embarrassment of riches. There's so many things I could say.
Exactly.
I can't. Oh no, they freeze
the
up.
The full alphabet mafia over here.
Oh no. Oh.
I went through this weird. I feel like it wasn't even like, how are we going to bully you? It was, how are we going to put y'all in the same group and identify you all as the same person? Because one of my best friends in high school was Filipino, and we're still friends to this day, but so many people thought we were brother and sister. So many people thought we were twins, to the point where during twin day on our senior year, we were dressed up as each other. And, we were best friends, and we were like, we're besties, and like, people think we're related. But now that I'm starting to think about it, it's just like, you really thought a Filipino was twin sisters with a half white, half Cambodian person. It's just kind of like, it's all bunched together. They just like,
because we all look alike.
Because we all look alike, and that's not true. So, yeah. And
I feel like trying to identify us and trying to label us isn't always malicious, but it like, you could, like, they can have microaggressions and be racist without it being consciously malicious, I guess. Like, there's so many degrees and so many intents. Sometimes people are just trying to relate, or not relate maybe, or try, like, identify you for the purpose of, like, who is Dimitri? But then there's an inherent flaw there too, which is like I need to figure out what Dimitri is so I can know what he's good at and how he's thinking. And it's like, why don't you just ask me?
Like, if you're trying to figure out who Dimitri is and what he's good at, you're stereotyping.
Right.
Just because you're Sri Lankan doesn't mean like, you're good at everything that every Sri Lankan does. Right. Or like being Asian doesn't mean we all know Kung Fu.
Right.
Or, are bad drivers. So I think you just have to relate to somebody on a personal level rather than try to figure out what they are and lump them up in a group, because we're all individuals, right?
There are times where people misidentify you. Wait, has there been times where people like have misidentified you and treated you one way versus another?
Hawaiian.
Yeah, I actually rarely get that I look Indian. Like, no one ever thinks that I'm Indian. And then if I do, they always think that I'm Punjabi, which is the north of India, because that's actually what's most represented in a lot of Hollywood media. So that's kind of where people go directly. So, and I am just very adamant on correcting people on that because I'm very proud of who I am. So I do like asking people to guess sometimes just to see what happens. I get like Indigenous, Native American sometimes. A lot of times I get Hispanic or Latina, but I rarely get Indian. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Cindy, were you gonna say them?
Yeah. I get mistaken for Hawaiian, and I've also been mistaken for Latina and Hispanic. So I've heard it all. Like, and I have people that have looked at me and said, "You do not look Asian. Why are you here?" Like, I have a vivid memory of going to. There was an Asian cultural club on my campus in my freshman year. I went to the first meeting, and the first person I talked to flat out said, "You don't look Asian. I was wondering why you were here."
Wow.
Yeah. I unfortunately experienced a lot of people that I was trying to connect to on a cultural level just kind of shooting me down because I didn't exactly match or fit them.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the experiences. And then another experience is in the same cultural group, like when I was like older, I would go out and about like how college are. You go college parties, and like they would just start calling me the white girl, and I just didn't like it at all because I've been very sensitive about my identity, especially like growing up with that. Am I Asian? Am I white? How am I both? And like, eventually I realized I can be both. I am both. I actually, I am both and I am proud. So having somebody just straight like take away that Asian and just be like, oh, you're white, like you're the white girl. I was just like, can you not say that? Because I know you're just teasing me, but it's not fun anymore. It's like,
right, because they're disregarding your other half, right?
Yes,
You're
exactly. Both. Yeah, exactly. That's how it felt. And they probably didn't intend for me to feel this way, but that's how it felt. And
right.
Yeah, being biracial comes along with other struggles, not just being Asian.
Yeah. There's also the idea of like acting white, where it's like, what does the majority want from us? Do they want us to be what we're labeled as? Do they want us to be like them? They're going to make fun of you no matter what. I feel like that's the lesson learned, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, Dimitri, why can't you just be more like everybody else? Or, Dimitri, you're a coconut. And it's like, and then you get that from other people in your own, grouping, right? Like calling each other coconuts, and it's like who's whiter, who's more Sri Lankan, whatever. Like it's this weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's like the constant struggle between trying to assimilate into, especially when you're growing up, assimilate into white culture and also stay identifiably tied to your roots was such, I don't know, I'm sure everyone can relate at some point, but it was such a struggle for me because I felt like I had to run away from it in order to be accepted by people. And then only now is it being celebrated when you have like so many South Asian people that are doing great things in media and in the world in general, that now I feel like, okay, well, now I can step out into the light and actually show who I am because they'll embrace me. They'll really embrace me for my differences versus before I was outcast because of those same differences.
Yeah. What has changed recently when it comes to representation in media? Simu Liu pops up in my head.
Like, I love him.
He's awesome. and like, I think, and dare I say, the big defining factor of Simu Liu is, well, actually, he has a couple of great things going for him, but like, he's a very attractive man. He's a hot guy, right? And that, like, for some reason is this, like, spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down kind of thing. Where it's like you have him and then people accept you. It's this weird thing. I don't know. JT, did you have a...
Yeah, I mean, because it's funny, like, going through TikTok, a lot of, like, Asian from Asia don't find him attractive because he doesn't have the, for lack of a better word, he doesn't look, they're white. Like he looks like an Asian man.
Yeah.
And I think Asia, they want to be more white than we do growing up here in the United States.
Right.
Or anywhere else. So it was just a weird dynamic seeing like people from Asia saying, no, he's not attractive. But here we see him as extremely attractive. But another thing I just was wondering is like, Simu Liu is not exactly the first Asian to hit mainstream media.
No.
Is it because he's male? Because Lucy Liu was technically the first to be on mainstream media, but she's a woman. So why didn't she have the same impact as Simu Liu?
I will let Cindy or Shiv respond to that. Shiv?
I actually don't know who Lucy Liu is by name, so I'm about to...
My heart.
I am a terrible person.
Yeah, I think that the easiest answer that probably people don't want to hear is that women are just not treated the same as men in media. Yeah. The more like, I feel like complex answer is maybe that she didn't get a lot of the roles after Charlie's Angels, right? Is what she was in. So like, I think that it's a two, again, it's like a...
I'll be right back.
Oh, she gets like put in the spotlight and then doesn't ever get to see the light of day after that because she got her one-hit wonder type of thing, and that was it, right? It is really great to see that Simu is getting more projects outside of Marvel, right? And that he's getting like romantic comedy type castings, because that's a really important thing to see. It's also obviously really important that we got Crazy Rich Asians for the same concept, right? Like we never really see Asian couples in rom-coms up until literally 3 or 4 years ago. Like that's a crazy thing for me to think about, considering I was raised in a predominantly Asian society. So like, I think that just with women in general, it's the way that Hollywood handles it is just super, I don't know what the opposite of delicate is, but they just kind of like just toss them into roles and then you never see them again. And they're never put at the same pedestal that men are.
Right.
So
yeah, honestly, now that we're talking about it, I know Shang-Chi was not the first Asian hero to be seen in media. It was Mantis, because Mantis in comic is half Vietnamese. And I did enough research about Mantis to know that her MCU counterpart compared to her comic counterpart is just nowhere near the same. In fact, the person that created Mantis was disappointed with the MCU creation of her.
Yeah.
And me having no awareness of what her comic book self was like, when I first saw Mantis in Guardians of the Galaxy, gasp! Oh my gosh, she's amazing. She's so funny. I love the like oblivious alien like thing. It's like, this is how I need to smile so people will like me. It's just like, I thought it was like a funny like, oh, she's like this because like she's an alien that doesn't understand like human socialization.
Right.
But you know, apparently she was nowhere near her comic book counterpart, who was apparently one of the strongest heroes in Marvel. Like that's what she was made to be. So it's weird how she was drastically different.
Yeah. And
it was like shot down.
I also want to add that when you mentioned that Simu was hot, agreed, obviously, but on top of that, there's like in the South Asian creator community that is like not related to movies at all, just like beauty influencers, right? Yeah. There was this conversation that came up about how as a POC woman, you have to be extremely hot to be like, if you're in the room with other white women, to be considered to be picked right amongst the flock. Yeah. And it's something I felt to my core, being a part of even just a very light-skinned group of Indian people and being the darker one, I was never looked at, right? I'm not saying this as a way of saying I need validation from men to pick me. I'm saying that is a fact in society and in the beauty standard that we live in. So when you talk about someone that looks as good as Simu making it out to Hollywood, finally, it's that way for so many other people. And the one that comes to mind immediately is Kingo. Wow. Name.
Kumail Nanjiani.
There we go. Okay. And because he was in movies prior, he's obviously a comedian. People never thought Kumail was hot. I'm just going to put that out there right now, right? My guy had to get a 6-pack and then post the 6-pack in order for people to even recognize that he had some sense of hotness. And even then he was called like, you know, from the neck down, he was hot. Like no one would want to consider that his face was attractive, right? So he's like the epitome to me of like, okay, so in order for us to make it, we need to fit this specific standard, right?
Right.
So that's just something I thought of when you said that Simu was hot, but yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I brought up Simu not to say he was the first or anything. He's the forefront recently.
You're right. I feel that he really did like charge.
Henry Golding kind of did a pass to him, and then like Simu Liu is dunking it. I think they
all walk so that Simu could run.
Yeah.
What's that TikTok audio? It's like, she fucking strutted that runway, mama, so that Peppa could run. That's what this is.
I think that ties in what we were talking about in the last 5 minutes, is that the purpose of any non-white male protagonist in a thing is to support the story of the white male protagonist. So if you're not white male or the protagonist, the goal is to support the white male protagonist. So Lucy Liu, for instance, her goal is to look hot, be the love interest, so on and so forth, right? And there's a purpose for the exotic Asian woman trope is like you pair them with a white guy, and now that is their purpose. And you don't get treated as seriously as an actress because you're window dressing for the real star of the show, Kevin Costner. You know, the real star of the show, blah blah blah.
Savior.
What? Sorry.
The savior.
Yeah. Prince Charming. He has to be white, right? It's his show. And then as time went on, then you bring in Asian men to do support for that white male protagonist. But Asian men are doing things like literal support, like IT, man in chair situations, dork, so on and so forth. One of my acting teachers was like, essentially was like, you're great, but you're gonna just get like supporting best friend roles, and you got hope you're cool with that kind of thing. And it's like, cool.
I just, okay, this is going to be such a random thing for me to say, but I feel like this is a place where I can say this. When I was a kid, my sister and I got cut from the all-white cast of Mulan Jr. in the community theater company.
From Mulan?
Yeah, it was. They were putting on Mulan Jr. and the entire cast was white kids, and my sister and I were cut from the show.
What?
Yeah,
and you're literally half Cambodian.
Yes, exactly. I just remember, and like sometimes to this day, like because that community theater that put on that production, like they have a consistent history of like not being the best. So in recent news, like things have gone down at that company, and so my sister and I have just kind of been going like, hey, remember when we got cut from the all-white cast of Mulan Jr.? It's just kind of like, geez. Like
there was a community theater that I was a part of. That's great. They're great, but I do think they have blind spots because of the demographic of a city north to me is like predominantly white, and so they're from that city and they do good work, and they there's nothing about that. That being said, when I was in high school, they did The Wiz. We did The Wiz.
Not The Wizard of Oz, The Wiz.
The Wiz specifically.
Oof.
So me being one of the only people of color there, I didn't need a lead role. I didn't get a lead role. I did get a role. I was the gatekeeper, which has a speaking role. But the point being is like, I didn't ask for anything bigger than that. What I'm trying to say is it fair to say that there are stories that like people need to not do unless they have the demographic for it?
Well, specifically The Wiz, because The Wiz is an adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, which is a white production.
Yeah.
The Wiz was made as a person of color production. Why choose The Wiz? You have The Wizard of Oz. So why do The Wiz and cast an all-white cast?
Yeah. My sister in junior high, she did Once on This Island. Is that what it was called?
I believe that's what it's called, yeah.
That was like an all-white cast, like in her junior high. There's a lot of cases of this, right?
I've seen this happen multiple times in various different like community theaters, and it's like this is something I never really thought about until recently, where it's like, oh, that was racially insensitive, wasn't it? like,
yeah,
like the all white cast of Mulan Jr. because we're all children, like we all don't know any better. I didn't think. Like when I got cut from that show, I never thought about it on a racial standpoint. I just thought that I wasn't a good enough talented child to be in the ensemble. Like that's where my mind went. And I just nowadays I'm just kind of like, oh wow, that is a thing that I experienced that can be seen as bad.
I'm almost afraid to ask, is there video of their production? Because
there's gotta be somewhere.
I'm afraid of makeup and costuming choices. I'm just afraid.
I do not think they did any racially insensitive makeup.
Okay.
Because I remember going to see that show, and I don't remember anything like that. But then again, it's been this is like plus 10 years ago, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
So. Oh yay! We love community theater. I love that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. What were we? I'm trying to cycle back and kind of what were we talking about? We're talking about Simu Liu. We're talking about a Kumail. Shiv brought up a good point where like you got to be a 10 out of 10 to be considered with the 7s out of 10, essentially. Like to compete.
Isn't that all of Hollywood though? Like,
but there are 7 out of 10s competing for the same role, like a 10 out of 10 person of color. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I see what you mean.
Like, dare I say, the white range is 7 to 10s, and the people of color range is 10s, and you gotta be a 10.
Yeah, and like across the board, not just like looks wise, like your talent also has to be that level versus we get some like mediocrity that they put out for a lot of white casting. It's just like, okay, well, how'd he get this job? You know?
Yeah.
The mediocrity of it all.
I was watching Top Gun. I watched Top Gun yesterday because I'm gonna go see Top Gun Maverick, and I'm like, I need to watch the first one because it's been a long time. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, but the character of Goose, who's like Tom Cruise's like wingman, or not wingman, second chair in his jet, he could have been played by a person of color, because that actor did not add anything of note to that character. He did not do anything. He was not good. He was just there. He's like, I'm the best friend. That could have been a person of color, because that guy, like, there's no standing up for that guy. You know what I mean?
There's so many casting choices where I'm just like, this could have been a way more diverse cast. Like, for no reason did it need to be just white people.
Right.
But also think about it. Like, this was done in the 80s where diversity wasn't such a big factor back then. I think diversity became more of a factor when, dare I say it, like social media came on board, where we can voice our opinions openly and like demand stuff. Before we were silent without social media. Now we have the voices, our voices everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that we're demanding more diversity is what changed it. So back in the 80s, there was zero representation.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Not just our voices, but our connections too, right?
Right.
For minority groups that live in the Midwest, you know, they can now talk to minority groups in other parts of the country, right? And we can share ideas, and we can also be like, people in Flint can be like, hey, everybody, our water is not good. Like, by the way, I don't know whether that's been solved yet, but
I don't think so.
2023, you know? But like the communication, you're right. Social media does change and it connects us. Cause I'll be honest, like my family is kind of insular. It's just 4 of us. We're just kind of like, we're not part of like a bigger community, other than like what we had in school. And so like being able to connect with people obviously, changes things. But I think the mindset back in Top Gun days and just older days is like, cast an all-white movie because everybody is going to see an all-white movie, and their mindset was, if you do a black movie or an Asian movie, only those communities will see those movies. But everybody loves white people. That's the Friends mentality.
That's a good point.
You know? But what I was trying to tie in with the Top Gun thing is that like a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction is like, best person gets the part. But when you look at Goose at Top Gun, I'm like,
could have been played by anyone.
So then what's the excuse there? I don't know.
I think back in the 80s also, they had very specific movies for very specific audiences. Like I remember watching Top Gun, but like my humor ranges more in like the person of color. Like I used to watch Eddie Murphy movies like Boomerang. Boomerang is one of my favorite movies, and it's pretty much an all-black cast.
Yeah.
So I think they were they targeted specific genres, whereas now we want a mix. We want more of a representation for what we're seeing, like with a mixture of different cultures and races.
Yeah. A word I'm throwing out there, and I want to know people's kind of thoughts about this. I haven't said it yet. Is proportional representation. When we have populations, having media, because media affects life and life affects media, and it's this weird cycle that sometimes gets a feedback loop. Having proportional representation is important because we're representing the population as is. Why aren't 50% of heroes women? Because 50% of people are women. It should literally just be a half-half thing. Like, let's just draw a line and like do that. Why is it so hard for us to accept female superheroes? But the same goes with racial groups, ethnic groups, minority groups in general. People of the LGBTQ plus community, like proportional representation. How come? I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts about proportional representation?
I believe it's going to get better with time. Because I feel like even recently, we're starting to see more of that representation. So it's like, and I agreed with JT. It's like social media really was the thing that was like, hey, we want this. Like people started having a voice because of social media. And I do think that because of all this, things are starting to change. And I think the more time passes, the more change we'll see. We're going to see a lot more people representing a lot of different backgrounds. And I'm excited to see where it goes, because there might be something that hasn't been made yet that'll come out in like a year or two that's going to be like a really big impactful thing in a positive way. So I think we are going in the right direction. So.
I agree. I think as the years go by, we're seeing a lot more representation and seeing it from, versus what we had 10, 20 years ago. It's such a huge difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I know we mentioned, like, why wasn't this here growing up? Like, I think, Shiv, you said that earlier. It's like, why didn't I have this growing up? Like, these characters or these shows. I completely relate to that. It's like, I didn't have this growing up, but I am so glad that the future generation is going to grow up with this. I am the Raya for a princess party company in my area.
Yeah.
Fun fact, I am wearing the friendship bracelets that some kids made me when I was Raya. They got like little dragon gems on them.
That's awesome.
And one of the girls that was at this party that I went to, she was dressed as Raya. Like she had the like little Raya kids outfit. And I looked back at the photos that we took of each other because I was like, let's hold up our bracelets together for our photos. She never took her eyes off of me. Like every photo I have with her, she is looking at me and nobody else. And
that's so important when you have kids looking up to you. Like they see themselves in someone. Mm-hmm. Like it's huge.
Yeah. And I see it a lot in the cosplay standpoint because that's what I do the most of my time. I'm a cosplayer, and I've had experiences at conventions where I actually had an experience when I was cosplaying Silk. So Cindy Moon.
Love Silk.
Yes, I love her so much. I had an experience where an Asian father came up to me and was like, "Can you take a picture with my daughter?" And I was like, I have no idea if this man knows who I am or like who this character is, but he saw me and was like, looks like my kid. Like, yeah. So like, I see it a lot in the cosplay standpoint. I definitely see this as a step in the right direction. It's just like having all these characters and like having that representation and it mattering. I hope mattering's a word.
Yeah.
I think we're going in the right direction. That's kind of like the moral of what I'm saying. So.
I mean, like, going back to what Shiv says, like Bridgerton, you are pretty much getting a very huge cast of person of color representation, specifically Southeast Asian.
I also think with the concept of proportional representation comes another, like, maybe a bridge concept of responsible representation.
Yeah.
Because although we are getting great smaller minority storytelling in a lot of different projects, whether it is superhero related content or not, to me, it's way more important for people to do their research and make sure that even these small stories that we're telling are accurate, because like you said, life and media are so clearly tied together that people then start to perceive people based on what they're viewing. And what I think is actually really important about proportional representation is how that affects creators, because what we're seeing now that we've never really seen before is just a very diverse group of people that feel comfortable talking about whatever content they want to talk about, whether that is from the range of beauty to film on TikTok, but also that they're adding their voice to this conversation, because like you mentioned, 50% of the population is female, but we don't see those people cast, right?
Yeah. When
I think about Rotten Tomato reviews and how many people go watch a movie based off of that count, do they ever realize that like the proportion of the reviewers that they're basing that whole critique perspective on is probably men, number one. Number two is probably white men. And then number three, if they are POC men, that's the third group. And then the last group would be women. And then even below that is POC women. So it's something that I thought about recently because I watched The Northman, and I'm not going to talk about how I didn't like it, but I just wanted to mention the fact that the critiques on Rotten Tomatoes, the majority of those the critics on it are white men.
Yeah.
So when people are saying, look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, I'm like, no, I don't care about the Rotten Tomatoes score. That's not my perspective. I don't feel myself reflected in that. And it's my opinion at the end of the day. If I didn't like it, it's because from my lived experience, I don't see myself, or I can appreciate the story of what they're trying to tell. But at the end of the day, like, you're telling me I'm supposed to like all this egotistical machismo on screen. Why? Because I'm not a man? Like, I'm so confused. And I think that people get so lost in this concept of like, oh, well, why does representation matter? And I'm like, if you were to see it very clearly from someone with lived experience, then maybe it would make sense. So that's kind of what I think about with all this like the new wave of representation and diversity that we're getting. Is just like, I'm totally here for it. I completely agree with Cindy that it's going to get better with time. And these are baby steps that are definitely worth celebrating, but it's just going to get better with time.
Yeah. I agree.
You brought up a good point, and I think it's worth talking about how, like, not only is it representation in front of the camera, it's behind. And it's not just in cameras, actually, because like a lot of us are plugged into comic books, right? And like comic book representation is also, like, in front of the camera means the characters, right? But like behind the camera is the writers and the artists. And what we learn in whatever media it is like representation has to be proportional or responsible in every step of the matter, right? Like, for instance, in the comic books, I was reading a short story or a short vignette in DC Comics Shadow Warzone, but it had to do with Talia al Ghul and Ra's al Ghul, who are Middle Eastern, East Asian kind of mix. And for the first time in a long time, they colored Talia al Ghul brown, and they made Ra's al Ghul look East Asian, and they incorporated like words that were like a father, like, what was it? It was like Baba or something. But the point being is, I've never read that in a Batman comic, and I'm like, I wonder who first thing wrote it to incorporate that, because that's something very specific, and then drew it, and like, oh yes, it's people of color that we're keeping an eye out. But the same thing applies for like who are writing these stories, like who's writing Crazy Rich Asians. It's fair to point out that the author was Asian. Great. Is it another, let's just say, white guy who's writing an Asian story of what they think like that would be? I think that representation is important, like all around, and that gives us a better, better representation because of it. To tie in with the responsible representation that Shiv was saying.
Well, yeah, because if you're somebody who's writing it of that culture, of that racial background, you can relate versus somebody who can't relate to your story or how the culture is. It just feels out of place.
Right. I'm
one of my favorite books is Joy Luck Club.
Okay.
Written by an Asian woman, about Asian women, about generational Asian women. The story is so powerful, and each of their vignettes is just incredible. I mean, there's a movie as well, so if you want to watch the movie. But I just found it very powerful about self-worth and how, certain things pass on from one woman's generation to the next. And just to have it written by an Asian woman, it was really, you can tell.
Yeah. On the flip side, I just had I was like, I should look this up. The Last Samurai, written by like 3 white guys.
Yeah.
Who's the star of it?
A white guy.
A white guy.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
It's things like that. If you look back on like these like American-made Japanese movies, they're not going to have Japanese writers.
I think also what you mentioned about people being behind the lens, right? If you're talking from a film standpoint, in real life, I'm a wedding photographer. So I really do value my eye, again, through my lived experience, and also because I can relate to a lot of the cultures that I'm shooting. But when you're talking about filmmaking or TV show production, I think Moon Knight is like the most recent example I can think of how impactful it is when you have someone that is a minority telling the minority story, and also using their music that they use in that show, just like really brilliantly making this all-encompassing view of their culture so that people can be proud of it versus fetishizing it, exoticizing it, or making fun of it with stereotypical usage. And the same thing goes for Shang-Chi and for the more recent conversation around Ms. Marvel. I know that there are a ton of South Asian creators that are excited for it, but then you see total backlash for it otherwise, right? Because people can't look past certain things in order to appreciate that this means a lot for minorities that have not felt represented in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned photography, and it's very interesting because you will get photographers that only photograph white weddings, or you can tell from their stuff because they will put a filter on. By the way, any likeness or similarities to anyone's story is pure coincidence. I'm not calling out anyone specific, but there'll be a wedding that's primarily white with a couple people of color, and they'll slap like a rustic filter on the whole thing to make to kind of give color to people who are white, but then it just changes the color of other people. Or they're like overexpose one or underexpose the other. But it tends to be that they will underexpose the white people, not overexpose. So it's in the service of their white subjects as opposed to their more melanated subjects.
Yeah.
Photography kind of has that.
And the same thing you were talking about with oh no, the thought left my mind. The same thing you were talking about with white people writing The Last Samurai, right? You have a very similar concept in photography, especially weddings, and especially in California because there's so many South Asian weddings.
Yeah.
You have white people that have dominated this space for a very long time that are photographing weddings that don't necessarily abide by the rules and customs of South Asian culture. For example, taking your shoes off before entering a house. For Sikh weddings, for Punjabi people that wear turbans for their weddings, you have to cover your head, whether you're a female or a male. And there are a lot of white people that don't know that prior to going into ceremonies. It's almost like there's a whole rule book, right? For every different type of culture. And even within the Asian subcontinent, right? Or the Asian continent, there's so many different sets of rules. So to me, it's always been really interesting watching white people in this space, because I'm kind of sitting here back laughing because I'm like, you're doing this all wrong.
Right.
And I don't need to be the one to educate you. If you claim that you're an expert in this space, then you should know that. And you should have the respect for these cultures to do that. And this exact same philosophy applies to writing and direction in Hollywood, where they don't respect people enough to actually do the research to represent them correctly on screen. And that ends up leading to a lot of backlash from people that are actually within that culture that don't feel represented.
It's almost like a occupational imperialism.
Yeah. It's a great way to play it. Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a thing. Did I come up with that?
You just made it up. Yeah, you just did right now. Point it.
TM. Trademarked right there. Knowledge, right? Like knowledge and empathy is like knowledge and empathy is super important. The willingness to learn, going to going to a Jewish wedding and not abiding by the customs is not good, right? Going to any place that's outside your realm of understanding and not abiding by the customs, not great. Has there been anything in like the things that you've been watching that have been glaringly obvious that the writer just kind of wrote BS, that they did not know the customs in like a movie or a TV show or anything?
I wouldn't say it was about any cultural representation, but if you watch Netflix's new movie Senior Year, there is a South Asian actress on there. She's South Indian specifically, and they named her Janet Singh, which is very odd considering that Singh is a Punjabi last name. And Janet, although there are definitely anglicized names in the South Asian subcontinent, it would never be paired with Singh because Singhs are typically Sikh. Yeah. So religiously, none of that made sense to me. And you just have that the same thing where I constantly feel like white people are writing roles for people, and then someone auditions that as a POC, and then just don't change the name. And I'm just wondering, why is that the case?
Like what?
I think it's up to the actor or actress who is POC, who is Southeast Asian, to bring it up to the writer and say, hey, this is culturally incorrect.
Yeah, I definitely think the onus does fall on the actor as well. I know she's a very new actress, so that's kind of where I'm maybe thinking she didn't feel like she had the say or the hold to make a decision like that. And I think it's definitely gotten better over time, but I really don't understand. And maybe someone that is in the acting sphere could answer this question, right? Because I know that you get roles a lot of the time that are typecast, like Dimitri, how you brought up all of the various roles that your acting coach said that you could basically play, right? But is it on the actor to accept those roles and make with what they're given with the character to make it non-stereotypical, or is it on the writer to not even have a role that exists like that in this time and day?
It's that's a multifaceted question. It comes down to power, right? There are so many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to doing some sort of film production that things get changed along the way, but then things also don't get changed. There's a writer, then there's the directors, the producers, there's all of that. And an actor isn't technically supposed to be writing their own lines, right? Or changing certain things. They could bring something up, but sometimes if it's your first gig, if it's the person in senior year, I don't know who that person is or whether that's their first gig, but they might not feel comfortable bringing it up. And sure, I would like to say you got to bring it up and at least have it on the record that you brought it up. But at the same time, sometimes you just keep your head down and you're like, this is my gig. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to, kind of do what I need to do to kind of push forward. I feel like a lot of minority actors have very similar starting out stories where they're playing Kal Penn plays a terrorist in 24, right? That's after he plays a three-dimensional character in Harold and Kumar. It's weird. He had to backtrack, do that, then kind of move forward.
Yeah, because what other opportunities do they have, right? If you're just starting out and you're getting these opportunities out the door, yeah, of course, I do feel it's your responsibility to do the right thing and take the role that makes the most sense, that's not offensive. But especially about like 10, 15 years ago, that was not even an option for a lot of actors. So
again, social media changes things, right? You can tweet out that people are being racist on your set. Something happens, right?
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. Cindy, did you? I forget where we left off with you, but
I don't know, I've just been listening. So
yeah. Yes, I think that like those actors should bring it up, but then there are cases like, and this is a minority situation and not like specifically Asian American, but the actress who played Angela in Boy Meets World, she's black. They did not have a hairdresser that could do black hair, so she did her own hair.
Oh wow!
For a primetime show on ABC, she did her own hair, and they did not supply her with a hair person because they can't work with that, right? They don't have the experience, and it was a predominantly white show. She was like the only person of color. She was the only person of color, not just like she was the only person of color, and they didn't have a hairdresser for her, and they didn't bring one in specifically for her. She just did her own hair for a primetime TV network show. I
think that's the same conversation about who's behind the lens, right?
Yeah.
And that means like the entire production. Like, are you doing the right thing in terms of wardrobe, styling, especially because that has so much cultural ties to a lot of different cultures.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So deep.
Similar note about the lighting on Insecure, but the opposite is that they light it so well for dark-skinned actors. Like, there are literal articles talking about how they light for dark skin to make it look gorgeous. Whereas I can't tell you how many like projects I've been on where where I've had to be like, I know it's hard to light me. I get it. Sorry. Why am I apologizing? Sorry, you don't know how to light multiple different skin tones. You're only used to lighting light-skinned actors. But I have apologized. I shouldn't have, but I have. But I also say, if they lit Wesley Snipes in Blade, they can light me. Come on, man. Like,
there should be like a class specifically for like, people of color.
Right. Working with people of color is a very specific thing that a lot of people just neglect, and they're like, nah, I can just do whatever I want. So again, occupational imperialism.
Have you heard about the Shirley card in terms of lighting in Hollywood?
I think I have, but maybe not.
It's basically just a bunch of white women, very different, not very much different in skin tone. Like when you look at foundations for women, there's like this big of a range for white people and like this small of one for POC women. But the Shirley card is like a card that they would use to balance skin tones. I think probably back in the 70s, I want to say that's when it started, that Kodak came out with. And that's how like lighting in and of itself has a very racial history in Hollywood. And that's why a lot of the skin tones and why people are confused on how to light is because it stems from that foundation. So I totally agree in that schools should have a lighting class for darker skinned people. It's like one of my biggest qualms watching TV a lot of the time is that they really like bring up the exposure for a lot of dark people, and we end up looking like we have huge triangles like in our highlights.
That is something I have never thought about ever. But
lighting?
No, I've never realized this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, like even just taking a camera with like when you're out with your friends and you have varying skin tones, like where do you put the exposure? Do you overdo it? Do you underdo it? Like, but like if you're a professional, that's your job.
Right.
Yep.
To do that.
Also, your iPhone camera enhances everyone's exposure, no matter who you are. So whatever you see in your camera is actually not your skin tone at all. So you should always drag down the exposure a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
Good to know.
constant Eurocentric beauty standard.
Yeah. Yeah. But like what we're saying is like, yeah, representation across this whole kind of thing. Have there been any other like glaringly obvious like, Cho Chang pops up in my head from Harry Potter?
Oh my God, I don't like that name because it's 2 Asian last names.
Yes.
In one. And back in 2020, there was a huge Harry Potter TikTok craze, and everybody was making, all the cosplayers were making Harry Potter OCs and like pretending they were going to Hogwarts and stuff. And like, I had a bunch of friends that like literally wrote stories for themselves within the 7 years of Hogwarts they chose. And we all chose like to make OCs based on what house we're a part of. My house was Ravenclaw. So I literally was like, I'm about to make a Harry Potter OC knowing full well someone's going to call me Cho Chang. And it did happen. If I'm remembering correctly, when I first got my Harry Potter attire, like I got the tie and I got a vest and I got some socks, like Ravenclaw socks. And I made a Instagram story and I like a picture of me with it all. And I just kind of went, oh my God, I'm excited to do a Harry Potter OC. And then I think I also wrote like making bets for when I'm going to be called Cho Chang. And I'm pretty sure somebody responded to that story saying, are you cosplaying Cho Chang? And I was just like, they did not understand the assignment.
Oh my God.
They did not understand the assignment.
Yeah. Cho Chang, the Patel twins in Harry Potter. Wait, who here has read Harry Potter or knows Harry Potter stuff? Okay. I mean,
we're all cool kids. All right.
Yeah.
I'm the cool adult.
Yeah. Like people pointed out on TikTok how the Patel twins, their saris in the Yule Ball were like really bad, and like it seemed like they were treated as an afterthought. Like the costume designers like, we'll throw some curtains together and see what happens.
Well, yeah, I think it's surprising considering it's filmed in England and they have access to a lot of great Indian clothing. I mean, I'm just going to chalk it up to the fact that it was made in a certain time period and there probably weren't a lot of brown people behind the lens working in costume production. You know what I'm saying? Like, right. I don't think anyone did the due diligence to even research. They probably just went somewhere in London and just got some outfits and called it a day. But
right.
Like I said, that's why it's important to have people of color behind the scenes too. Yeah. It's not just about in front of the camera. So
yeah, at the very least, the proper education, the proper knowledge. So the thing about occupational imperialism is that like
gonna slip it into conversation.
I'm gonna own it now because like it's going into other spaces and not choosing to learn, but choosing that they adapt to you and that your ideas are correct. So it's that unwillingness to learn. It's like, okay, don't tell me what a sari is. I already know. I can do it. I'm a costume designer. Of course, you know, and then just like put something together and it's like, that is not what is that?
Yeah.
It's weird. Was there a movie that stands out that did it right? That did all these things, like represented the people correctly? Crazy Rich Asians was like a big phenomenon when it came out. I personally think it has some flaws, but it was very refreshing. Like my mom and I, we go and see those movies, right? Like we're just like, this is awesome. Like we're gonna support that. Is there like a big movie that stands out to you guys that like that's your number one? That's one of your number ones?
Bend It Like Beckham. Very old. So it's actually ahead of its time, in my opinion.
That's a very good movie.
Yeah, but there's definitely some caricatures of Desi culture in it. But overall, a lot of what they talk about queer representation in that film within the South Asian community, even, which is like super rare for brown people. And just like her being a tomboy, her wanting to choose between sports and saris, essentially, quote unquote, like it's one of my favorite films. It does a lot of things right. So
yeah, it's definitely underrated. I remember watching that with my family. And like, yeah, like the dad wasn't allowed to play cricket in the clubs, in like the major clubs, because they were racist.
Yeah.
But then you get this also, was it Jonathan Rhys-Meyers? Is that who?
Yes.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is this...
JT's like, yes. Unforgettable.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers has something in that movie where he's just like, don't you think I know what it's like to be discriminated against? And it's like, okay, fine, product of its time. Okay. Yeah. But otherwise good.
But it's also relatable, right? Like she's talking about being called Paki when she's Indian and how that makes her feel. And of course, we see that in the BLM movement, right? How white people are like, they want white lives matter versus black lives matter. Like, that's not the point. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're struggling for vastly different reasons. So,
but it's also like a regional thing. Like, Americans don't use Paki as a slur. Yeah. Like, it's a British thing. And that's like when I had to learn, I'm like, oh shit, like, yeah, they would use it against me if I was there. You right? Like, they would use it for all brown people. Like, that's
or specifically darker brown people. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And that's not something that like I experienced that specific thing here, but that was illuminating as well. But yeah, bend it like Beckham.
Like Beckham.
Yeah, bend it by Beckham sounds like a brand of clothing. It's Bend It by Beckham. It's his line. Yeah, that's a good one. JT, did you have one that you were going to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Joy Luck Club did it really well, like in terms of Asian culture, because it was written by an Asian woman. The cast is fully Asian. Ming-Na Wen is in it. I mean, it's like one of her first movies. It's a great cast, and it's resonated with me for such a long time, only because it's very Asian centric and it's about women, and any story that features Asian women in the forefront is something that will resonate with me.
Yeah. When did that movie come out? That was the 90s, right?
I think so, yeah.
I just looked it up. It's 1993, because I was curious too.
There's a lot of like actresses that I know that are in it.
It's a huge cast of actresses.
Ming-Na Wen, that's right.
How did this film get made in this time? If we're talking about diversity in this time period, like, this seems like such a great risk to take,
It was. That's why it always stuck out for me, because it was such a huge risk of its time, and it was widely successful. And I think it's because the book was so widely successful as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I say risk because of like how, Shang-Chi, how Kevin Feige mentioned that they're basically taking a risk with the Shang-Chi story, right? And how that made so many Asian people feel because of that. Like, but it's really crazy to see that in the 90s. I feel like that didn't exist in that time. So
yeah. How come, why do you think that this movie being successful did not pave the way for more stories being told, especially with these actors and actresses, like higher profile careers?
Maybe other studios weren't willing to take the risk. They were scared to take the risk. This studio might have been a pioneer in, storytelling. Who knows why?
Right. Cindy, Shiv, do you have any opinion about that specific question?
I think it's about definitely what JT mentioned, that no one was willing to take the risk, but also that what you mentioned about Goose, right? And that in terms of audience, people are attracting, the majority white audience to the theaters to watch these films. So like, are we going to make more movies that hit minority groups, or are we going to make more movies that will bring a larger group of population at that time? Obviously, the population has changed since then. So that's what's also been really interesting about Hollywood, right? Is that they're trying to attract a whole demographic of people that they never really had to prior. So
yeah.
I think a lot of what was, I think the biggest factor, especially way back when, oh my goodness. I think a big factor that plays into it is just what makes the most money. So it's like, tell these minority stories and consider it a risk, because it's like, we don't know if we're going to profit from this. It's like, you know, Hollywood is going to choose what they know is going to make the most money, because at the end of the day, it's a corporation. It's a business. They're just trying to make a profit off of all of this, instead of having this, what's the right way to say this? Instead of having this representation, it's more important for them to get the money in their pockets.
Yeah.
So
they're not considering the art or the sociological impact. They're creating. They're thinking about the impact on their wallet, right?
Yes, exactly. That's I think the biggest thing, and that's what I think we're starting to break away from, or I hope we can break away from. There are so many beautiful stories out there, and I don't think it matters how much money it will make. When somebody sees it, they're going to go, "Oh my goodness, this is beautiful," and it doesn't matter. Like, I have many friends that think Shang-Chi is one of the greatest films that Marvel has made thus far, and you know, I don't think it's because like it's solely because of the cultural thing. I think it's because it was told so well. There was such good action scenes in it. The whole thing with the family, it's such an emotional thing to watch, and I think that's what kind of matters. It's like having that cultural background, but then having these great stories that come along with it, and that's why I keep saying we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And we're starting to break away from something. And I feel like we're in the very first stages of seeing this.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love Shang-Chi and I love Joy Luck Club, is because both stories were about family. And both stories were so rich in storytelling about family and culture. It was just so well told.
And I also think if we're talking about a movie that hits both the art standard and also the production gross profit standard, is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like, it hits the perfect sweet spot between being able to showcase the cinematic beauty of film and also a very minority storytelling concept, by also producing a ton of money in the box office and getting a lot of people to talk about it. The way that we've never really seen, to be honest, for a lot of minority stories.
It does hit so many aspects, and that's like, it's so funny how much people have been talking about the movie. The movie only came out like what, 2 months ago, 3 months ago at most.
I still haven't seen it.
I still have yet to see it.
See it while it's in theaters if you can find it. Even if you can find like $1 theater, $5 theater, whatever. Like, see it on the big screen.
Get your life together, JT. What is going on?
No, I have to be there with JT because I haven't seen it yet either. So I can't let him go down without me there. But,
oh my God.
You have to watch it soon, please. It's amazing.
Yeah. To answer kind of, or to what I was asking, like why the Joy Luck Club didn't lead into more movies, more stories with these actors and actresses, is because I think people view that as they view movies about the Asian experience with Asian actors as one thing, but they consider the human experience as a specifically white thing. You get what I mean? Like, Asians have the Asian experience, Black people have the Black experience, but only white people have the human experience. Because we could take Ming-Na Wen. Why don't we take Ming-Na Wen and put her into an experience in which she's, she's just a mom trying to raise her kids, and like suddenly like rowdy neighbors move in next door, and like, why can't she be the actress in that movie? That's a human experience movie, right? But she can't, because she's not human. We're not human.
But
we don't have the human experience.
I also feel like Ming-Na Wen and at the same time Lucy Liu both got typecast.
They did.
They both, because Lucy Liu, when she first burst into the scene, she was on Ally McBeal, and she played a dragon lady. So every other role she's had, she always played that strong dragon lady type. Whereas Ming Na Wen, after she did Joy Luck Club, she went on to do, oh my God, Street Fighter, where she was Chun-Li.
Was that after or before?
It was after.
Oh, okay.
And so when she did Chun-Li, I think she started getting typecast because she's Asian. She knows how to fight. And then, of course, she shows up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as May, as typecast as well.
Right.
So
She
I
also
don't know if
voiced
she was...
Mulan.
She voiced Mulan, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm looking at these. Yeah. That's funny that you bring up typecast, because typecast affects everyone. That being said, people who are minorities or in ethnic communities get typecast with their ethnicity, whereas, let's just say, white actors can get typecast due to archetypes, right? Which is something I was thinking about before this show, is that, like, this archetype of, like, yeah, that's a cop. Yeah, that's the silent stoic hero. Those don't apply to minority groups. Minority groups get placed into ethnic stereotypes. Right. Versus, like, we can be like, Chris Pratt with a six-pack is an action hero, but also smarmy, sarcastic, whatever. That's his type. But that, like, applies to anything. Like, that could be a barista. That could be a cop. That could be a whatever. But Tiger Lady is a very specific, ethnically specific role. That doesn't apply to everything.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, you're right.
Like, who's going to play a cowboy? Who's going to play an astronaut? Who's going to play a cop? Who's going to play a doctor? By the way, the fact that there's not more, like, Asian representation in any hospital drama. What is going on there?
Oh, right, like Grey's Anatomy.
Not a single brown doctor. That's incorrect. Factually incorrect.
I'm making this face because I would have never realized this. I don't watch doctor shows.
It's weird.
But you do see them in movies pop up. I feel like if you're talking about like science and academia, there are typically a lot of Asian and brown people that are cast in those roles.
Right.
Is it because we're being stereotyped?
Yes, it's a typecasting. And as coming from a creative in this that's brown, that's why I feel a certain way about it. Because I'm like, well, you never show any brown people that are in film, that are just working in production, in like if they're on camera. It's always white people most of the time that are just like holding a boom mic or like. So it's like a strange thing to think about typecasting when it comes to like non-culturally representative roles. Like if you're just having someone on screen that is supposed to represent something.
Right. And even if you fill a hospital with background actors who are diverse, where are the speaking roles going?
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Right. Who's the focus? Who are we supposed to relate to? Who has the human experience?
Yeah.
It's because ethnicities aren't considered human, or ethnicities aren't considered having the human experience.
I do think that is changing, though.
Yeah.
We're seeing finally people of color enter roles that are leading characters, romantic leads that are getting the human experience right. Or they are just like doing everyday things that, like you mentioned, like the mom living next to rowdy neighbors, like that concept I feel like is now finally getting put into play because they're finally realizing that you didn't need to look a certain way to play that role.
Right.
But I think that is kind of where I see the future of representation going, is us finally filling roles that are just meant for good actors versus having some type of always having to tie back to cultural representation. I want more visual representation in the future, just like people being people. I would love that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
You brought up romantic leads, and I think the biggest shift to representation and like making it progressive is the shift from sex object to romantic lead. Being a romantic lead, I think, is the biggest step forward for any group. I know Billy Eichner has a movie coming out called Bros, which is a gay romantic comedy, and that is putting queer representation to the forefront with a romantic lead instead of just a supporting character that's going to give you a makeover, right?
I have mixed reviews about that movie, though.
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
I have mixed because I've only seen the trailer for it, and
Yeah.
I just see Billy Eichner being a white man kissing other white men.
Right.
And I'm like, where's
Yes.
the diversity here? Like, there's
Right.
more than just white men.
Right.
Have you seen the trailer for Fire Island, JT?
I have.
Okay. Do you have thoughts on that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I have a hard time with the LGBTQ genre sometimes because it revolves so much around sex.
Yeah.
And this is what I love about Heartstopper, because it was never revolving around sex. It was such a pure experience, and it was innocent. It wasn't raunchy like a lot of these, LGBTQ genre movies tend to be just about sex, about hooking up and making it a comedy, making it about romance. But like, I like Heartstopper because it was about an innocent love, an innocent attraction, and that teen angst of how you feel about falling in love,
I will say that I was excited for Fire Island because at least there was some Asian queer representation.
True.
And it wasn't only just white men, because that's the first thing that stood out to me in Bros was like, okay, well, I do love Billy Eichner, but there's not a single person of color on this in this trailer, which is not good for what's going to happen in the film, right? But with Fire Island, I completely agree about the whole most gay rom-coms that have come out within the past like 3 years have been about sex. And I'm just grateful that it's not constantly coming out stories, because I feel like at some point we got to move past that in order to normalize being around and being amongst queer people, or else we're just going to see them differently in society, and that's not doing anything to benefit them, right? So I'm all for these movies coming out, but I definitely agree that there needs to be, just like we talked about with Ming-Na Wen, there needs to be, the queer people also need to just be everyday people doing everyday things.
Right.
As that's eventually where this needs to go, or else we're going to get them also being typecast, essentially.
Right.
And like going back to you saying, like, transitioning from being the sex object to a romantic role. Henry Goulding tried to do that with Last Christmas, where he became the romantic leading role. So having more of a leading role, I think, just makes it more possible for, AAPI representation in media to be leading roles and leading romantic roles.
Yeah. Lucy Liu was kind of a sex object, right? Like, she was the hot Asian girl.
She was fetishized.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of like Asian women in general, right? Like it's South Asian, East Asian, Asian women get fetishized into this exotic thing. They can appear as a James Bond, like femme fatale.
Michelle Yeoh.
But like are they being cast in the human experience?
Right.
It's tough, and that's kind of what's going on right now. But things are changing, and I want to kind of end on talking about that. Is like, what is changing right now? What does the future entail? What can we hope for the future? We don't know what the future entails. Do we have any idea of like kind of what we want to see?
I think for me, I just want to see more representation across the board, whether it be rom-coms, sitcoms, action movies, TV shows. I just want representation, and not stereotypical representation. Like, I would like to see an Asian or South Asian astronaut. He doesn't have to be white. Right. Like you said in Top Gun, he doesn't have to be white.
Yeah.
So just representation across the board. And I think we're getting there. We're moving in that direction.
Yeah.
I think Shiv kind of said it exactly how I want it to be. It's like the visual representation. Just when getting to that direction. I think that's what I want to see in the future, because like I said before, I think we're going in the right direction, and we can only go up from here. So
yeah.
I also think that right now we're seeing a lot of generational trauma stories based off of our cultures, right?
Yes.
And I think that's
like, what are the examples here? Like Turning Red.
Turning Red, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
Encanto was most recent from last year. Those are the ones I feel like TikTok really just brought to the forefront, right? But I think that is a result of people in our age demographic actually taking space in Hollywood and getting their stories told.
Yeah.
So what I hope for in the future is an evolution of those stories, just like how I mentioned with queer coming out stories. I want an evolution of how we are now second generation Americans, right? In still rooted in our culture somehow, but also just living everyday life. So I want to see that the story evolution happen with a lot of, whether across the genres, right, that we're seeing, but also more, again, visual representation of people that's not constantly tied to culture, because like Cindy mentioned, you know, we're even as an adult, I feel like I'm still trying to decide what part of me identify most with or in certain aspects of my life. So I think that is something I want to see just more in the future.
Also, I just want to add content creators. I'd like to see a lot more representation in content creators, like what we do. And I think that helps bring forth change.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree there.
I wasn't sure whether I was gonna like be able to touch on this, but like growing up, I was always told like, oh, I'm smart, right? Like, because that's like kind of a thing. Also, I was smart, and was I good at math? Yes. Was I good at spelling? Yes. Are those stereotypes? Yes. But I like, that was like either expected of me or like kind of a given. Then when I did comedy, like, okay, like I'm funny, but then you realize that like there's like characters that are funny on TV that look like me that aren't necessarily great, but that's fine. But like growing up without the proper representation is like, who then can I look up to be the person that I want to be? Because there weren't romantic leads, and then that led a young me to be like, where do I fall in the romantic landscape of real life, right? If I can't see that in media, where does that happen in real life? So I kind of like, even though this is a flawed thing, I don't know if anyone watches Grownish, but there's Vivek on Grownish, but he's still treated like the dummy of the group. Shiv, have you seen it?
I've definitely seen episodes, yeah. And I've seen Vivek on there for sure.
And it's like, okay, cool, he dates, he whatever, but he's also not, I don't know. Anyway, I forget what my original question was, but I want to see more. I want to see just do better human experiences coming from all different minority groups, and like the generational trauma thing will burn out soon enough. Once we got that solved, we won't have any more generational trauma. But like the human experiences and seeing that, and like hopefully the kids growing up kind of have that. Oh, to tie in with what JT was saying, I remember where I was going with this, is the content creators and having people see themselves in you, and having like us be smart and educational and being like good role models and doing the right thing, hopefully, and like kind of paving, like just doing our part, even if we're just a stepping stone.
I always look at it this way, like if you can touch one person, that's enough, you know, because it feels like a domino effect. Yeah. You might inspire somebody. You don't have to inspire hundreds. You can just inspire that one person.
Totally.
Yeah. Making an impact, even if it's just knocking the next domino over.
Yeah.
Right. That is super important. Does anyone have any final thoughts that we didn't cover before we wrap things up? Again, it seems funny when we start it, we're like 2 hours. Like that's a good amount of time. And then it's like at the end of 2 hours, like, oh, we could have written more books on this thing. It's just one book.
I want to say thank you for having me here, because I learned a lot more than I was expecting to learn.
Yeah.
In all seriousness. So I'm glad I got to be here.
Thank you, all three of you for being here. I think, yes, we all have so much more to learn, and I think the difference is that we know that we have more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and we're willing.
If there's anything you need to take out of this episode, it's the trademark term occupational imperialism.
Last plug.
Yeah, I'm gonna plug that. But
That's
I think
the
that
name of the episode.
that relies on like going into a space and being like, I know everything already. What's the point? You know, like shush. I got nothing left to learn. But no, we're all coming into it being like, we have so much to learn.
But that's the healthiest part of it. It's like you have to come into a space where you're willing to learn and hear other voices. Yeah. Like if you close off and you say you know everything, you're not willing to hear anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think it's like an important aspect that JT brought up about the content creators specifically, because we're seeing a lot of different minority ethnic groups that are coming out and speaking on certain subjects that are helping us learn. Almost like they do the research for us sometimes, which is not great, but I think it helps us at least try to be like, okay, well, I didn't know that, so maybe I should do some more research on it to like better understand where they're coming from or what it is about this that relates to their culture. So I wholeheartedly agree. I really want to see more diversity in content creation, especially in film critics and reviews, like I mentioned. So.
Yeah, and like exactly what you just mentioned. Like I just learned myself that, you know, being AAPI month, the PI part of AAPI month doesn't necessarily feel included in the AAPI month, and some of them want to separate from it.
Yeah.
So that was something that I had to learn. And when I was first approached by it, I was stubborn and I was like, no, you're part of it. You're part of it. But I had to consciously sit there and listen and humble myself and say, you know what, you're right. Like I didn't intentionally I unintentionally didn't include the PI part because I was just saying like my 5 favorite comic book characters, but I do realize that there needs to be more PI representation.
Yeah. And something about the constraints of this talk in general is that like we can't hit all our topics that we even wanted to talk about. We just write more books on it. Like that'll come later, I guess. But like there are obviously like whole groups that are not represented by this episode alone. But I think that the lessons that we learned and the education that we have here hopefully can be applied across the board, right? Yeah. Going into spaces and like learning from people and learning about different experiences and that we all have human experiences. We're not just like one type of person. I think that can be applied to everything. We're all talking about our own like specific experiences and trying to like tie it all together. But again, we're not a monolith, you know, and we're all kind of doing the best we can and kind of being the best people that we can. And hopefully that helps other people, you know, and helps ourselves. 'Cause I'll be honest, there's a lot of decoding that I've had to do, defragmenting, whatever metaphor you want to use, of like society telling me who I need to be, who I am, what I can't be, and kind of like decoding that mindset. Because you go with the flow in the beginning. You're just like, yeah, that's kind of how it works. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, let me ask more questions. And I think that's important. I want to thank the audience out there for watching. I know that a lot of there were a good amount of people that were watching, but I know that they were staying a little quiet, and that's great. That's fine. You know, more power to you. Thank you so much for watching. Paula 99 says, great talk. I learned a lot. Smiley face. And then Patty Luquin or Luquin says, same here. I really enjoyed it so much. And I want to thank anybody out there who is watching this live or listening to the podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I want to thank Cindy, Shiv, and JT so much for being on this episode and talking about this. Otherwise, it'd just be me talking about it for 2 hours, and I'm not going to do that. It's not about me, you know.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
It was nice meeting you guys, Cindy and Shiv.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Likewise.
Before we get going, though, if we can go one by one and tell everybody our social media, where we can find you, what you got coming up. Cindy,
All
where can we
right.
find you?
So now with my new rebrand, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at It's Cindy Che. So, and I have it written. I don't know if you could see my.
Could you spell it out for people listening to the podcast?
So ITSCINDYCHEA. It's Cindy Che. And then I also, every time I'm on your show, I love plugging my YouTube channel that has no videos yet, because one day there will be a video. It's just a matter of time.
Is it also It's Cindy Che?
It's gonna, if you look up Cindy Che, you might be able to find it. Just because since there's no videos on it yet, it'll be easier to go to my link tree and then go to my YouTube that way. So yeah, but one day there will be a video on there, I promise.
Okay. So, you can upload your TikToks to YouTube now, I think.
I could, but that I want to like compile them in a specific way. So that requires effort.
That's fair. It's rebranding season.
It's rebranding season, you're right.
It's rebranding season. Now's the time. But thank you, Cindy. You do great cosplay. You do great work, and
thank you.
I love having you on the show. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I love being here. So,
well, I'll continue having you then.
Okay.
JT, where can people find you? What do you got coming up?
You can find me on TikTok and Instagram. I don't have a YouTube channel. I'm debating if I should have one, but both my handles are White Wolf of Themyscira. White Wolf being tribute to Sebastian Stan's character, Winter Soldier, and Themyscira because I love Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
But moving past AAPI month, June's coming up, and it's LGBTQ plus month, so I'll be doing a lot of LGBTQ plus stuff.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
You do great content, and I forget what you brought up. Who would you have on your team? And you obviously brought up Wonder Woman. I'm like, of course, White Wolf of Themyscira. Of course, you would have Wonder Woman on your team. That's fair. Oh no, it was where would you want to be a mutant, an Amazon, like a Kryptonian?
That's the one. Yes, that's the one.
You were like, oh, I'd obviously be Amazon. I'm like, yes,
of
course. See, that's on brand. No rebranding for you.
Yeah.
That is on brand.
It's all on brand.
Oh shit!
I love that.
That's so dope.
Wonder Woman tattoos on your wrist/forearm. For anyone out there watching the podcast. That's awesome. I didn't notice that. I've never seen that even in your videos. Have you shown that in your videos?
I think I have early on. Like there was a TikTok that I stitched. They were like, based on your tattoos, would you win? And I'm like, damn right I'm gonna win.
Those are badass. Okay, yeah. All right. And Shiv, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
I am on TikTok, Shiv, SHIV _ALRY. It's a pun on my name, chivalry. And I am only on TikTok for film stuff, and my Instagram is purely photography. So there's absolutely no correlation between the two. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's chivalry _INC. So you can do that.
Is it period or underscore?
Or underscore, my bad. It's underscore. Wow. I don't even know my handle. Great. But yeah, so I have a split personality. You could choose which one you want. But yeah, what's to come is just a lot more talk on representation, especially with what JT mentioned with a lot of the Pride stuff. I do want to cover those movies because I feel like there's not going to be a lot of people talking about it. And I want to help add to that conversation. And also, with Ms. Marvel coming out, which is really big for a lot of South Asians, just talking about the show and bringing a lot more awareness. There's a lot of Pakistani people that are in that production too. So it's going to be a really fun time.
Quick question for you, Shiv. How do you feel that Ms. Marvel and Kenobi are getting released on the same day, same time?
I think that they have so much time between projects. I don't know why they couldn't change the release date or
the day of the week.
Or yeah, exactly. Or the production changes. But I just
they're cannibalizing their own franchise though.
I know.
They're both Disney.
It is ridiculous to be honest. I think they did that for another Marvel TV series as well.
It's the first time, actually.
What?
Yeah,
really?
It's the first time. They even moved. They've moved schedules around to make it work that nothing lands up on the same week. Yeah. Now I get it, more projects, but you could have had one come out on Wednesday and one come out on Friday.
Yeah, there's 5 days for you to release this stuff. Like,
right.
There's no reason for that to be the case.
Right.
And Ms. Marvel's been announced for a long time, so I think that's kind of sad. But
I'm kind of peeved because I'm very much looking forward to Ms. Marvel, but I know Kenobi is literally Obi-Wan Kenobi. So that's going to dominate water cooler talk. They're going to watch that first.
Yeah.
And then get to Ms. Marvel when there's time.
I mean, that, and a lot of people are already not excited for it. So once again, I just want to bring more. I want to vocalize more for a show that I feel like a lot of people are saying stuff about. So, yeah.
Well, I have one question about Ms. Marvel to Shiv, and actually to you as well, to everybody. Yeah. How do you feel about the power change?
A lot of people bring it up.
That's the first thing that was talked about when people started talking about it, and I saw the conversations.
I think the logistical argument that I see a lot of people making for it is that, like, the whole Reed Richards, sorry if you have not seen Multiverse of Madness yet, I'm so sorry. The whole Reed Richards inclusion, right, was the whole reason why they didn't give Kamala those powers. So I think it's kind of ridiculous how he literally in Multiverse of Madness, and we just don't really know what his future is.
But like, I don't really know much about Ms. Marvel, but like, doesn't it play a huge role into her growth as a superhero, being able to shapeshift?
Yeah, I think that they're trying to tie it more into Captain Marvel and Tiana Paris's character,
Maria Rambeau,
and Maria Rambeau as well. Yeah, so I think they're going in that route because they're making the Marvels somewhere down the line. So that's what I have heard. I have not read her comics, so I'm not going to sit here and talk about what it means to me. I'm purely just excited to see that type of representation on screen.
Representation, yep.
Yeah.
I've read the comics. The comics are consistently one of the best comics, like, ever. Like, it's been a consistent run, and like, her comics are like always great, even though they have highs and lows. Like, her as a character, she's great. But my quick opinion is that there's too many arguments from like every which way when it comes to her power change that I've just yes, her stretchy powers and her shape-shifting matter in the comics. I agree that it's probably the energy constructs is to tie in with the Marvel, the Miss Marvel and Maria Rambeau brand, because that movie is going to come out either next year or the year after. So I get that. I also think that there might be it might be hard to do a stretchy superhero, and like it's tough to make that like a conceivably believable character. It does have to do with her like personality in the comics, but they changed it. I'm not writing off the series for it, because I think it'd be doing the series a disservice to write it off because of that. Let's judge it off of it like
100%.
like of how it is as an adaptation. It is an adaptation, and so let's judge it off of that. And I'm excited for it. I just want others to be excited for it too. You know, will I watch it with my mom? I'll probably watch it with my mom, actually. I watch a lot of movies with my mom, so it's not just that, but yeah. But there's a lot of things to look forward to. DC Comics and Marvel Comics have little anthology books that they release for different months. So like Marvel just had Marvel Voices Identity, which was I believe the AAPI anthology book for this year. But during Pride Month, they also do books for Pride Month. They do books for Black History Month. So if that is something that interests either people on this show or out there in the audience, go check those out, because they've been doing a really good job with it, with hiring writers and artists of those communities to do those stories. And I think that makes a difference. I will stand by that choice. But thank you, everybody, for being able to talk with me about this topic. or for listening. For anyone who out there who wants to follow the Keeg on any other social media, it's at the Keeg Show on TikTok and Instagram. Those are 2 big ones, but we're literally live streaming right now to Volume, Twitch, and YouTube. So we're all over the place. You could look up the Keeg Show on like anything. We're there. And also listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We do multiple different shows a week, so definitely stay tuned. I will be doing a Miss Marvel after show. But I have to figure out, again, this sucks for me. I have to figure out the Kenobi after show and the Miss Marvel after show, because we've been doing after shows for Marvel and Star Wars related content. So, Shiv, I will definitely be hitting you up, because I want to know your opinions about Miss Marvel. But thank you everybody out there for watching this. Once again, I'm your host, Dimitri Pereira, and this has been the Keeg Talks, AAPI Representation in Media. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Super strong or super fast.